Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing this week? I'm going to keep this intro short. I'm at the end of my rope. The last 3 weeks. Anything that could come out of one of our animals has come out of them. They somehow got Giardia. We're not sure how. We think we're past the worst of it right now, so that's good. But I will say this. If your spouse, your partner, whatever, and you, if you're having more than, let's say, one conversation per hour about feces, maybe that's something to examine. Also today, they're recalling saline and rice, so things are going smashingly here. Anyway, this is a really wonderful episode today because my guest is Elanor Moss, and if you don't know who Ellie is, I'm going to read you her bio right now. Originally from Lincolnshire, hope I'm saying that correctly. Originally from Lincolnshire, musician Elanor Moss grew up in a very creative, devoutly Catholic family and began playing music at church events. She started writing her own music while studying English Lit at the University of York. In 2022, she released her first EP, Citrus, followed a year later by the Cosmic EP. This garnered her some attention, and her debut album, The Knife, the Needle, was just released on Merge Records, and folks, it is great. I didn't really know about Ellie before, and then I was sent her album, the aforementioned The Knife, the Needle, by her publicist, and it ended up becoming a near daily listen. And unsurprisingly, Ellie herself is very cool and thoughtful, and we have a very analytical discussion about class and integrity and vulnerability in making art and in navigating the business of art. Of course, as always on the show, seen through the lens of her childhood and her creative and existential goals. It's every aspect of this. I just loved discussing it with her, so I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed talking to Ellie. Very quickly before we get into the episode, just want to preview a couple talks coming up. David Rees, the wonderful writer and cartoonist David Rees, Sweeping Promises, fantastic punk band. Their new album is out of sight. Solex, that was so cool. Hutch Harris of the Thermals. Evan Dorkin, cartoonist Evan Dorkin, one of the best in the biz. That was such a delight to talk to him, so stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Ellie. Set the scene. It's evening in London. What part of London?
So I live in Northwest. I live near Hampstead Heath. So north of the river. London is split in half by the River Thames. So I'm northwest of the river and near Hampstead Village and Hampstead Heath. It's a lovely part of London. I'm very lucky.
What is that? Is that like a posh area? Is that where? What is it?
You know what? It is kind of posh. I'm not even going to lie. It is like an old Victorian part of London. So really pretty old buildings. And Hampstead Heath is like our big park. It's kind of equivalent to like maybe Prospect Park in New York. Nice and woody. Everyone like walks their dogs there. We've got our swimming. We have these old ponds that have been there since like probably Tudor times that are like these natural swimming ponds, and everyone goes there to swim in the summer and the winter, depending on how hardy you are. So it's all very bucolic, nice bucolic bit of London.
Sorry, just a pond? Like a pond? Like a
pond.
Not a swimming pool, not like maintained.
No, I mean, it's monitored so that you can't get sick. Like they monitor the water quality. But it is a natural pond and like birds live in it. You're swimming next to ducks and geese and cormorants and things. It's very nice.
So you're okay. So in this posh, sorry, I'm just trying to get a handle on this. In this posh area of London, there are ponds where you can go swimming with birds, which sound like what would happen here in like a backwoods kind of Appalachian area.
Yes.
Here in the States.
Yes. That's exactly it. And it's a long-standing London tradition. And I'm not actually in the posh bit of Hampstead. I'm in Kentish Town. So for anyone who knows London, they'll know the difference. And there is a difference. The difference is getting smaller as Kentish Town gets gentrified. But that's where I am. It's very British. It's like very, very Londony bit of London.
Interesting. Are you comfortable navigating different class structures?
That's a really interesting question. Kind of. Um, I mean, like my family, academic, so I came from like a sort of academic family. Like, it's all a bit, I came from a big family. There's six of us, six children. The drawstrings were tight growing up, but my parents both came from like really educated backgrounds. So, you know, I am not really from a working class family at all, but I'm also not, I wasn't quite middle class. Like we sort of slipped in between a couple different, what felt like a couple different categories. And yeah, it was quite interesting because we were also like, my parents were super religious, in a place where that was quite unusual. So there was a little bit of like outsideriness in that regard where we were homeschooled and we didn't properly fit in that way. But yeah, I'd say I I think there's also something about being a musician that you end up crossing a lot of different class boundaries. Like you rub shoulders with like ultra wealthy people and people on the complete other end of it. So I think there's also something about the artist lifestyle that actually traverses quite a lot of class distinctions. But I also, I live in a middle class area and, you know, it's yeah, I feel like I can, and I'm in often in situations where I'm traversing, but I've just described quite a middle class sort of London picture there, which is yeah, my home life. Living in this part of London, I've been very lucky to land here.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to delve into all of that, all of what you just said. But you said, if you're a musician, you traverse back and forth between class boundaries. But I guess the thing that I'm curious about is, are you comfortable doing that? We all, I think, if you're in the arts, like here, I'm in Los Angeles, and,
Yeah,
some friends live in kind of ratty apartments, some friends live in giant mansions, or, I mean,
yeah,
rarely. A few friends live in Lynn, but a lot of them live in like, $1 million homes in the
yeah,
hills,
yeah,
$5-6 million. And that makes me uncomfortable, let alone you get once in a while get invited to a party of a famous person and they've got like a stage built into their, like a giant outdoor stage built into their, $20 million whatever. And I'm very uncomfortable in those situations.
yeah. I think that's a nice distinction that you're making. I am often uncomfortable in the presence of like the ultra rich or the you know like just having a sort of obscene amount of money always puts me a little bit like, oh, I feel really like I don't belong here, and that I'm always trying to find the middle ground with people. That's how I make myself comfortable in situations where I feel out of place, and also how I try and just get along, I think, with people that I feel are very different from me. Like, there's always something you can relate over, but I find the further into that sort of thing that you're talking about, the smaller sometimes that common ground gets, and then it's like, ooh, okay, I'm not entirely sure how I should behave here, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable by making you feel weird that you have all this stuff, and I don't want you to be worried about me, but also I am uncomfortable, but I don't want you to think I'm uncomfortable. I definitely think there is a distinction between, you know, you do traverse these sort of boundaries, but yeah, it doesn't always make it comfortable or easy. That's for sure.
It just seems like in the UK, and tell me if I'm wrong, maybe this is just an old understanding I have, or understanding that I've gleaned from watching a lot of British television. It
Yeah.
seems like class is much more acknowledged that the boundaries are much more like you're over here and I'm over here. Whereas here, even though it's even more stratified, I think, or the
Mm.
boundaries are more calcified than in the UK. Everyone's like, no, it's permeable. Yeah, I work at the gas station, but someday I'll be a billionaire. And it's just like, oh my God. Like, it
Yeah.
seems like the US is way more delusional.
Yeah. It's interesting, and it's making me think of a couple things. The first thing that comes up for me is like the American dream, that idea that, oh, I work in a gas station now, but one day I could be the president of the United States and I could be a multi-billionaire. I feel like Trump really encapsulates a lot of the dark shadow of the American dream that's always been there. It's almost like he's the ultimate epitome of like the darkest version of that. And it's probably part of why he's so successful is that he's tapped into this myth that is the originating myth of America. So I think that's really interesting. And I think that I see that distinction that you're making, and it sort of seems baked into American culture, that idea. And that's quite a scary idea. And I think accounts for maybe some of the problems that are happening over there. And then over here, I think we have slightly older problem. We've been around a lot longer. Colonialism goes back just that little bit further for us. And, the class distinctions have been around a lot longer. And I think that stratification was a big part of our colonial identity. And we still actually have all those structures still in place. We have the private schools that are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old that you could only get into if you were a white man who was ultra wealthy. And I've actually been reading this really interesting book called The Genius Myth. I can't remember who that's by now, but it's sort of tracing the colonial and patriarchal background of the myth of genius and how baked into class culture it is in the UK. We have things like our Oxbridge, like Oxford and Cambridge, universities that are like our most competitive universities, most difficult to get into, but they're fed by our like eye-wateringly expensive private schools that most of our prime ministers come from. And so, that stratification is still really very culturally present, but also made very obvious still, like you're saying, like it is very, very visible. Yeah, class is definitely still a big thing here. And it's a bit tricky. It's tricky, I think, in the arts. There is in the UK a lot of class distinction in the arts just because it's so difficult to be an artist. It's so expensive and it's so risky if you don't have a safety net of some kind. It's pretty hard to do. And a lot of the artists in the UK that are very successful, a large number of them have had that safety net of money from elsewhere. And there's a certain squeamishness that they often have around that. They don't want people to know. It's like, that's when I think it becomes a little bit less visible, as there's this kind of squeamishness around money in the UK. Even though it's a bit more obvious, the class system, to me at least, seems a little bit easier to see. But once you get into the arts and a bit more granular with it, there is a bashfulness around money that I don't know if it's the same in America. I don't know if people are a little bit less worried about whether they're seen to have had a safety net or not. But certainly over here, I think it seems distasteful to I don't know, have come from there. So yeah, it's all a bit of an interesting hodgepodge.
I think here that people are there. It's different. Sorry. It's complicated because there are some people, depending on where you fall on the art spectrum, right? There are some people where they find it shameful that they came from money and they try to hide it. And they think that there's something more authentic about having, coming from a hard scrabble past. And I don't know about that. I don't know if that makes you, I know for sure it doesn't make you more authentic.
Yeah.
Being a shithead crosses class boundaries.
Yeah.
So, and being a shitty artist or being a good artist, it crosses class boundaries, and it's dependent on so many different factors that I but I think there is this long tail of reputation that goes
Mm.
back decades and decades and decades, where you had people where it was easier maybe to cross class boundaries in the 50s and 60s, and so you had a lot of artists that were able to do that and able to become very successful and make
Mm.
good art at the same
Mm.
time. And so I think that the reputation of that has not waned. And so
Mm.
everyone wants that, and they think that's authentic, even if that means that they lie about who they
Yeah.
are. And which
Yeah.
makes them less authentic, which then I don't know if there's any connection between lying about yourself and whether that can make good art or not, or whether that interferes with possibly being honest in your art or in some section of it. I don't know.
That's a super interesting question. That makes me think of the Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell feud. Did you know about this?
No.
It wasn't so much to do with class as far as I can remember, but Joni very famously hated Bob Dylan. She was like, he's a fake, he's made up his name, all of his songs are totally about made up things. Like he's a fake, he's a faker always and will always be a faker. And I'm real. I'm Joni and my songs are me and no one else could do it. Like it was this quite interesting thing. And I think there's this, I don't know how true this is, but I think there was some uh previous tiff between them that had triggered it. But I thought it was this interesting kind of insight into like that authenticity thing of like what makes something resonate as authentic. So and I think Joni is one of the few that would have called Bob Dylan a faker. And I doubt, I wonder whether she feels differently now. I bet she does feel differently now. This was
Yeah.
something that reportedly said decades and decades ago, and I imagine time has changed that. But yeah, I think the authenticity question is interesting, and it's funny that, you know, people think sometimes that struggling for your work makes it more valuable in some way, or makes your success more valuable in some way. And I think that also has echoes of the American dream in it, of like pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and that kind of hero's journey myth of the American sort of self-made person. I think that's very present there. And I wonder if that's partly to do with the commercialization of art and people viewing the commercial success of something as maybe a indication of the work's value because it exists in a capitalist system. So if it sells well, it's more valuable. So I think part of it's like how you measure value and, you know, whether I was the daughter of a billionaire or, the daughter of, someone who wasn't a billionaire, it wouldn't change the record that I've made. Like, if we were to put my record into it, it's like, it's the same. The work is the same. The context is different. How much does the context actually change the real tangible quality of the piece of work? So I think it's more to do with like the difficulty with who gets access, who is allowed to share their work as a result of their circumstances. And
Mm.
the reality is, if you can't afford to take the risk of trying to dedicate your life to your art, then no one gets to hear it and no one gets to make up their mind about that question. So that's also part of it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that's what I want to go back to with refocusing onto you. Is this thing where I think that when I talk about class, or why I asked about class, is because
Mm.
if you don't come from a wealthy background,
Mm.
this is a risk. Like, this
Yeah.
was all a risk. And some of the stuff, like in America, like I was kind of delusional about it. I don't think I understood what the risk was. I mean, I did. Like, I was like, well, if I fuck up and fail, I'm back living in my parents' basement, which I guess, it's better than being unhoused, obviously.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think I would have been thrilled for
Yeah.
that possibility to move back to Pennsylvania and, go back to the suburb I grew up in and live in my old room with Nirvana posters on the wall. Like, that would not have been a thrilling thing for me in my life. Without these safety nets, it is a risk to try to pursue this or to even put art in the world, because it takes a lot of time. Because, I work where I write and I podcast for a living, which is itself a privilege in this day and age. But then, like, there's other artistic stuff I do on the side. And to do that on the side means I'm working at like midnight. I'm working at 2 a.m. on this stuff. So if you're wealthy, you can just whenever you want to, right?
Yeah.
So there's all this stuff wrapped up into it. And I'm curious about you. No, like, 2 questions. One, when did you think you had an awareness of all this stuff, class, and the kind of limiting way that it can affect you both existentially and artistically? And then how did you get past that to make something, to make music, to make an album, to make period?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think like I've always had other jobs and I still have other jobs. And, that's the story for so many of my artist friends that I know. And the context that I grew up in, I am so, so privileged in the sense that my parents are both practicing artists in their own way. It's not what they did for work, but they are practicing artists. And I had an example in my life of like art being something that is just a part of living. Like, my dad was doing a PhD in English literature and psychology. He was looking at the how a child's imagination, how their moral imagination is formed from the sort of reading that they do as a child.
Whoa.
Which is amazing. And I feel really lucky that that was something he was interested in, because we really benefited from that, like the way he put that into practice and, being involved with us in that way, with like caring about our imaginations and that being an important part of our childhood. And my mum as well, she's a quilter, and quilting is her big artistic outlet and the practice that she's been, involved in. She also is a singer, and I learned to play guitar on her guitar that she had since she was 16. And, I grew up watching my dad compose on the guitar and write children's books that he never published, but he read to us as children. I watched him write his PhD in between his teaching. Like, he was a teacher by trade, and he would teach during the day, come back, do all of the work he needed to do for teaching, and then work on his dissertation. And he would take us to the library with him and, the university library. And we were too young to, do anything apart from like make up games in the library that involved complete and total silence so that we didn't disturb anyone. So I had that kind of workaday attitude towards art, where if it was a vocation like it was for my dad, you just did it. And it didn't matter that it wasn't his job. It didn't make it any less important or valuable in his day-to-day life. But as I grew older, I realized he'd actually had aspirations to do it professionally. And that's what he was pursuing before he met my mother and decided he wanted to have a family. And then he realized, actually, I'm never going to make enough money from music to be able to afford to have a family with the woman that I love. And so I'm going to do something else for money, and I'm going to, practice as an artist with the rest of my time. So I think it was as I got older and I realized that that my dad had made a choice basically about those things. And so had my mum. Like, my mum was a teacher and she ran a small business from home doing quilting education and other things, and brought us up and homeschooled us for my older siblings. It was for a long time. And for me and my younger brother, we're the youngest in the family. it was a shorter amount of time. Because I think they got very tired. It was like number 5 and 6, and they were like, "We can't keep doing this. This is really intense." So we went to proper school when we were about like 7 or 8, me and my younger brother. But I think it was as I approached, you know, early 20s, really, when I started to write songs. I started songwriting at 18, really. Before that, I'd just been performing and singing, but not writing my own music, and writing in my own time, but not writing songs. And it was as I started to see the world of like meeting other artists that were doing it and pursuing it as a career, and seeing how difficult it is to actually make money from it, and how often making money from it comes with a sacrifice of integrity, or it can challenge your integrity, or it can put these impositions on you where you're making decisions based on how successful it might be, as opposed to how artistically successful it might be for yourself. And that was something I didn't see in my dad. I never saw my dad having to compromise anything artistically, because he was just doing it for himself and his own interest in it and drive to do it. And this is all stuff I realize in retrospect now, as an adult who is pursuing a career as an artist. I have these opinions about, and these sorts of ideas about, my dad and the way he was about art growing up, that I didn't have when I was growing up. Like when I was growing up, it was just, oh, I want dad to go take me to the ice cream shop, but he's working on his dissertation, So I think that was, it wasn't really till my early 20s that I realized that, that it was something that was like incredibly unlikely for someone to be able to make money from. And then those questions about, okay, so I do want to do this as my career. That is different to my dad. Like my dad didn't want to do it as a career, but I do want to pursue this as a career. How am I going to do that? How am I going to do that and maintain a practice that is rooted in, the right, quote unquote, right things, the things that I deem as right? How do I maintain my values whilst stepping into this kind of, this ring that is the music industry? And like, how do I try and make money from this without compromising my values and ideals, which is even harder, I think, than just making money from it. Is hard. Making money from it and finding fulfillment in it is probably almost impossible.
Yeah.
People have done it, though.
Yeah. I want to ask about that, but I think you brought up something interesting that I don't know if I've thought about this as a distinction before. Also, by the way, Joni, just to go back to Joni Mitchell for a second, didn't she do blackface a bunch of times? Like, should she really be saying anything about anyone else? Just a parenthetical.
No, she did do that. That was not a good Joni phase. It lasted too long as well.
Yeah. I mean, love her music, but
yeah.
I think something that you said in terms of integrity, I think there's something I never thought about before about authenticity versus integrity. I think maybe one can fake, not you personally. One can fake authenticity.
Yes.
One can cloak themselves in what seems authentic, but I don't think you can fake integrity.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe when I look for something in music, what I'm looking for is that integrity as opposed to authenticity.
I love that. How do you know when in yourself, when you're listening, how do you draw that distinction? Have you ever been like, I should love this because there's something really authentic about this, but there's just something that's not clicking? And that indicates to you that maybe the thing that's missing is that I'm sensing that underneath it, there's something not quite there? Or like, do you have a way of like an intuitive litmus test, I guess, for that?
Yeah, but it is intuitive. I think it really is just a bodily feeling. Do I feel what I've been calling authentic before, I think is actually integrity. And what I'm feeling when I hear a piece of music or watch a film, whatever piece of art, see a painting, if it feels like it has emerged from that person,
Mm,
as opposed to, there are plenty of comics. I use this example a lot, but I think it really is apt. There are a lot of stand-ups I've met out here in Los Angeles where at first I thought, oh, when I see them on stage, it seems like that's who they are. And then I meet them in real life and I'm like, oh, that's a skin you've put on when you're on stage and you're actually an asshole. And whatever the version of you on stage is divorced from your
mm,
actual humanity. And even though it seems
mm,
authentic, and those comics were never my favorite comics.
mm.
And so it's something I've almost built ex post facto. Like it's almost something that I've had to have those experiences, and then I built a sense in my body where like you just start to get that kind of like, oh, this doesn't feel right. Why doesn't it feel right?
Yeah.
And then usually if you do a little bit of investigating, you're like, oh, this person, has nothing to do with who they are as a person, or it doesn't emerge out of them in any real way.
Yeah, I think that's really something I get when I experience art as well. I think that oftentimes the things I'm drawn to have given me a sense of like, use the word humanity, which I really like. But I think when I listen to stuff or watch stuff or experience things, I'm always looking for the ways in which the work reveals its humanity in some way. And that's often, it doesn't have to mean that the piece itself is really vulnerable, that it's like sad or, difficult or challenging. It can be silly and joyous and all these other things too. But if it doesn't have a vulnerability at the core of it, which is a willingness to put a little bit of yourself in it, it tends not to land for me. And I think that crosses across all uh, art types that I engage with, or modes of art that I engage with. And that's tricky. I think it's quite exposing for artists to be, that willingness to be like, oh, here I am, and I'm putting myself in it, and I'm risking something by putting myself in it, even if, it's not something that's all about the artist, if it's not meant to be, autobiographical, it's still, I just want that, like, that humanity in there, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's scary. It is really
Mm.
scary. Even to have like just the hint of your own feelings and emotions, like that, all that vulnerable stuff. Even just like a slight, like half an ounce is really
Yeah.
scary. How I was about to say, how did you get beyond that? But maybe it wasn't a problem for you ever. Have you always been someone who was able to be vulnerable in public, be vulnerable with other people, not just as a performance, but
Mm.
but with people, and then in that to put it into your art? Or was it just natural? Like that's just what happened?
I like that question, and I think that there is a distinction, and I don't know, there's a couple layers to it for me. I think that conversely to what you were saying before about people being able to kind of put on authenticity on stage, and then you realize it was only sort of a skin deep thing, and it's like, oh, that's a skin you were putting on while you're there, but actually, there wasn't any of you in it. You put that on to prevent yourself from having to actually put any of yourself into it. I
Mm,
think that is a thing that sometimes we see and is easy to do with our work if it's too hard to, or if we're just not in a place yet where we can risk that, putting that thing in of ourselves. But I also feel like sometimes the most vulnerable work can come from creating a kind of character and channeling something about yourself that is difficult. And often, if there's something difficult there, I think we're mostly all made up of the same stuff. Like if you were to like flatten every person in the world out onto some screen where you could pierce through and look at our essential pieces of humanity, I think we'd all ultimately be the same. So if there's a embarrassing or ugly part of me that I put into my work, it starts being from me. The place where it comes from, I think ultimately is that I've seen it in myself, or I've seen it in someone else and hated it and then gone, oh God, I have that too. And then it ends up being sort of digested into a piece of work. And then there's something about the digestion process that it stops becoming about me then. And it's like, even if it's taken from something quite specific in my life, I think the process of turning it into art gives it away. And that's what I want to do. I'm always very wary of, there was a really good foreword of Raymond Carver's completed poem collection. I think it's called All of Us, which is a great name for a poetry collection. But his wife wrote the introduction to it, and it was published after he died. And she wrote this line, which really tickled me, which was about how, Raymond Carver always used to say about poetry, it's not enough just to dump the gym bag of your life at people's feet and demand that people pay attention because it's sincere, because it's like, well, this is true, this is how I feel, and this is the strength of how I feel, and therefore it's true. He said, telling the facts of your life in that way is not always the most truthful you can be. And it's not enough for him as a poet. He was like, that's not enough. Sometimes you have to tell a factual lie in order to get to the truth of something. And so that's, I think, what I mean when I talk about character work. And I think as a songwriter, there's always a element of putting on the character of Ellie, the songwriter, in order to write the song. And it's funny because I feel like I come off quite open, I think, in my relationships with people. But those very close to me know that I'm actually quite guarded. And I find it quite difficult to be truly vulnerable with the people closest and dearest to me. And songwriting and the character that I'm able to adopt as a songwriter almost gives me access to a version of myself that is able to tell the truth about things as I understand it. Not even tell it, actually, because I don't think that I know the answers, but I think I see songwriting as a vehicle for asking the question. And it's a vulnerable thing to do. And so I think there is a certain amount of character that I at least imagine on an imaginal level that gives me access to the tools to dig around and ask the questions that I think are pressing on me. That's a long-winded answer, but I think that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah. No, that was great because there's a lot in there. One, I think, is a great distinction again between sincerity and vulnerability, right? Because art is, and I don't like essentialist definitions. So I'm not saying all art or anything like that, but I think there are a lot of artworks where the point is the transformation of one's vulnerability into this concrete, I was going to say object thing. Because a song is not an object, but like whatever, like artwork is the transformation of that. And sincerity is just like a greeting card. I mean, it's just like, dumping a thing out without there being any kind of flourish to it or, however you want to define art. So there's that, which I think is really interesting. But there's also this, like an artistic persona is a spectrum. I mean, as we kind of like go on in the 21st century, hopefully for a while before there is a world war or absolute climate devastation. As we go on, though, I think there is a dawning realization that existence itself is on a spectrum. Like we started kind of like understanding like gender and sexuality being on a spectrum. And I think we're going to get to the point where we're like, oh, I think all things can be on a spectrum, or even if like, 3-dimensional, we can chart 4-dimensional through time, right? We can chart how people move and trajectories and all that kind of stuff. I think we're aiming in that direction, assuming we don't destroy ourselves.
Yeah.
But this idea you brought up of a character, I think the difference is some of the people I was talking about who I thought were assholes, the character is at the end of the spectrum of like who they are. And the artists where I think there is some integrity to them, the character, like Ellie, the songwriter, I would guess it's not that far from who you are as a person. Like my wife is a stand-up, and who she is on stage is just her with more energy,
Yeah.
right? It's not
Yeah.
totally divorced. Like
Yeah.
there's a absolute continuity between her sitting in the den watching Strangers with Candy season
Yeah.
2, which we've been watching lately, and her on stage. I don't see much of a difference outside of like, certain kinds of performative type stuff that one needs to do on stage. So my question then is, how did you figure out how to channel your vulnerability through Ellie the songwriter? And I have that in quotes for the listener. How
Mm.
did you figure that out? And then how is it really that far from you, or is it just kind of like, a couple shades different?
Yeah. I like that question. I don't know. I feel like maybe developing the character of like you, the songwriter, is maybe quite similar to how a prose writer or a poem writer discovers their voice and develops their voice
Yeah.
as a as a artist, and probably the same for any artist. And I wonder if, and this harks back to something you said earlier about like feeling like, you said about integrity, you listen to or watch something and you just feel like that piece of work came from that essential place within the artist that is essential to them and is like they've located it and they are mining from that place. Again, like I think when you're developing the character of your voice in any type of work, it's probably something to do with that, which brings me back to the word genius, actually, which is a contested word. And we tend to reserve it for the people that we think are like, it becomes a ranking tool,
Yeah.
the best of the best. And
Or
there's a
literally, sorry to interrupt, but like literally, like it's at a certain number. Like there's a
yeah,
certain IQ number based on a incredibly racist and classist test.
yeah, yeah,
And that number then defines who is a genius and who isn't a genius. And
yeah,
only in one area, which is
yeah,
supposedly, I guess, scientific and factual. So that's the area that makes you a genius versus anything else. So
yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's just like it is so attenuated what that
yeah.
thing is.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And there's this beautiful reframing of the word that I discovered through the writer. I want to say John O'Donoghue, but it wasn't John O'Donoghue. Let me quickly find it because it's going to bug me. A reframing of the word genius by the writer David White, who's an Irish writer. And John O'Donoghue is also an Irish writer, philosopher who was a friend of his. But there's this wonderful David White quote about it, where it finds the origin of the word and sort of reframes it based on that. The quote is: "Genius is by definition something we all already possess. Genius is best understood in its foundational and ancient sense, describing the specific underlying quality of a given place, as in the Latin genius loci, the spirit of a place. It's the combination of elements that make a place carnate, fully itself,"
Ooh,
which I think is beautiful.
yeah.
And I think that's like, I think every person has their own specific genius, and that's unique to everyone. And I think one of my missions as a artist is like to locate that place in myself, like what is the part of me, what are the essential parts of me, and how can I create work from those places? And that way I can create work in the most generous way possible.
Ooh, generous. Love that. I love that as the word, as like from the most generous place. That's great.
Thanks. Yeah, it's just it's definitely hard to do that in the climate of also trying to be successful, because you have all the clutter of like, you know, what the metrics of success are in the society that we're in. And maybe generosity is helpful there, because it's like, okay, well, how can I contribute in the most generous way, and not in the ego driven selfish way of like, do people like how, what are people saying about this? Am I relevant enough? Am I ever going to be relevant enough?
Yeah.
Those, it's hard to make those metrics melt away, but they're just a part that all of us have to reckon with if we choose to go down this path, I guess. So I think, to answer the question about developing the character, I think my whole career as an artist will be mining towards that place, and being willing to go there and find those places and work from there as much as I can, and that will continue to inform the character of the work and the sort of the essential nature of the work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there's it's character also as like a character and also the character of the work. Not to get too
Yeah.
not to get too like French philosophy here and finding the different different
Yeah.
edges of a word, but like I do think there's something interesting there. But I guess the thing that I'm trying to figure out is how conscious was all of this? Like this idea, like, you're very thoughtful talking to you for the last 45 minutes or so, you seem like a very thoughtful person. So like how much of it was like, oh, this is just kind of naturally, all this stuff is naturally flowing out of me. This like, yeah, I'm a little guarded with with my friends and loved ones, but like, I feel like when I'm writing a song, it's a little easier to channel that vulnerability. And maybe, and I'm putting this on you, so this might not be true, but like maybe if I write a lyric, it's not from my point of view, but the emotion is from me, and that's easier for me to do. And then that emotion can come out in that way. So even if like the lyric isn't authentic, I guess, to me, the emotion is, and again, sorry, not to get too French philosophy, but integrity and integral. It is integral to me. Was that all natural and it just happened? Or were you making conscious decisions? Like you wrote a song and you're like, oh, I just don't like how this feels because it felt like it was coming from someone else or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that it became a sort of a guiding principle to try and orient my practice as a songwriter towards that feeling of like, yes, this is coming from a place that I am, relating to, or actually I think this is coming from a place that is not right, like it's not working. I had that actually with a song on the record. The first track on the album is called Fixer, and the central thing in it is like the image of the knife turning into the needle, and it's where that album title comes from. And it's not like I didn't have a concept for the album when I started, but when I finished writing all the songs and enough time had passed and I'd recorded it, I was like, oh, the album's called The Knife, the Needle, because all of the songs sort of follow this kind of they all have elements of that conceit in it, where one thing by the end of the song has turned into another. And I didn't do that consciously while I was writing, but it's worked its way through my thinking into all of the songs for the record. And so I was like, oh, that makes sense. But when I was writing Fixer, that all came out very easily. It all came out in one sitting. But I had previously written a song called The Knife that took a similar conceit where, it wasn't the same, but it was like the knife was an image for, the specific vulnerability that you might have that then, makes it difficult to be in a relationship with someone, because you're like, what if they find this vulnerable place in me and then use it against me? This idea that you can give the knife to someone in a relationship, not wanting to open up to someone because you're afraid of, how they'll treat that vulnerable place in you, whether they'll treat it well, whether they won't. So I had a song called The Knife that was sort of about somebody who was like arguing with a partner, and they kept going to that place they knew would hurt them because they were angry at them, and then they were angry at themselves for going there. And that was kind of the whole song. And I was like, okay, like it fit in the idea, but it's not, it just wasn't right. And I didn't know why it wasn't right, but I was like, it's not right. It doesn't feel optimistic enough. There's not enough hope in the song. I left the idea, I left the image behind, and then months later sat down to write Fixer. And then naturally, by the end of that song, the image had changed. So I found a hopeful way to posit that thing, and it sort of worked then. But it wasn't like I was actively thinking about it. Like the song I'd written, I felt before, I was like, oh, this isn't working, I'm just going to throw it away, I'm not going to think about it. I wasn't like actively trying to make that work and trying to shoehorn it into something. It just, I think a lot of the work happened subconsciously and through continuing to show up and try and write over time, that unfinished business sort of came out in the work. So yeah, I think a lot of it's to do with like just intuition. I think that I was trying to reorient myself after quite a long period of writer's, what I call writer's block, I guess. Wanting to be like, okay, how can I sort of try and writer's block proof my practice? I'm not sure that's possible, but how can I be more intuitive? And I think intuition was like part of that. I was like, how can I get my intuition back? And so I think a lot of it came from there.
I want to ask then about that intuition, but in terms of writer's block, this is what I found for writer's block. I feel like it is just, I don't think there is writer's block, because I think once you could just write, and that what it really is like, you're just not happy with what you're doing, and so you just don't do it.
Yes, I agree.
And really what you should just be doing is, I tell this to Naomi, I tell this to my wife all the time, which is just like, just write the shitty thing.
Yes.
She hates she's like, well, I want to just come out fully formed. And I'm like, I wanted to do that too. And I've had to learn over time. She's like, just write the shitty thing. Even if it's so painful to write the shitty thing, because you know that there's something else there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, it's kind of a perfectionism, I think. It's like, I only want to write if it's going to be good. And then every time I write something that's bad, I take it as this kind of affirmation that I'm a terrible writer and I should be doing something else. And, the voices start.
The voices. Yes. Okay. Yeah. But wait, the intuition, what I'm really curious about is, how did that intuition develop? Is this something that again, some people, it's just like, well, this is just the way my brain formed, and that's kind of how it ended up. What was the process of if that's not just how you were? What was the process of learning to trust that intuition, or build that intuition, internalize it, however you want to phrase it, or how it actually happened to you? I'm really curious about that, because I think that's the kind of key thing. Like, is it just observing your parents creating art for your entire life? Like, what is going on that allows that? And I have a couple like just biographical questions at the end, but like, I'm curious about this.
Yeah. I'm not really totally sure myself. I have a suspicion that it's something we all have when we're really, really young and we're not thinking about it. Like, as children, we're all such fearless artists and we're not judging it, or we're not necessarily asking, should I be doing this, or is this good enough? It's like just fun. It's like, oh, I want to make up this song because I want to, and it's fun, and it's sort of led by desire rather than kind of desire to be seen as insert, whatever it is. So I think as a child, it's naturally there. And I think I, like any other child, had it. And I think it's probably something I never properly lost my connection with, but I think it took a bit of a beating when I got a bit older. And once the initial honeymoon period with writing wore off, I stumbled into the music industry, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, and then sort of, I feel like I was like 21 or something when I, was first releasing music, and they were the first songs I'd ever written and recorded, and it was all so fresh and it was exciting, and the work was exciting, and I was unself-conscious about it. But I think it's almost like going through puberty. It's like suddenly I became really self-conscious about making work, and I got just jammed up. I think that there was an awkwardness that I adopted to deal with the discomfort of the visibility of putting yourself and the work that you're making out there. And I think my intuition took a hit through that, because all those other voices come in. I think intuition can be defined as like being able to identify a guiding voice inside of you that you can rely on and that you're not questioning all the time. And I think there's lots of things that can damage that voice. And I think, one of the things that can damage that voice is actually the music industry itself. If you don't have your protections against, it's like an inner child place that I think a lot of creativity comes from. It's a very childish thing, creating, because it's so playful. So I think that I probably always had it in the way that everyone always has it. And I think that the things that I did to help me get it back after I felt like it took a bit of a hit were a lot of listening, like paying attention to things, and a lot of things to do with actually like taste and being like, well, what do I like? And why do I like it? And what don't I like? And why don't I like it? And really simple things like that. And then just being led by that desire and curiosity, because that I think is the foundation maybe of your own intuition. It's like if you can identify what you desire, then that I think is one of the foundations of intuition. It's like when you're writing, you don't need to know what you're saying next. For me, at least, I don't need to know what I want to say next. I just need to say the next thing and be led by, I have a desire for it to go like this, so I'm going to make it go like that. You know, I think you can develop that in the way you consume art and letting yourself be led by desire in that way. And so I think repairing that part of me was a lot of engaging really deeply with art again and the world again and wanting it to be from a desire place instead of a fear place of like, what if this isn't,
Yeah.
good or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that has been my theory on the show for a long time, that whatever the mode of being one is in as a child gets repressed, or if not repressed, just pushed to the side. Something happens with a lot of people. Some people, there's just like a continuity, and they, for whatever reason, they're in a bubble, and whatever that feeling is as a child is preserved, and they just allow it to develop through their teenage years and 20 years. I myself had to wait until I was in therapy in my late 20s, early 30s for it to like really flourish again.
Wow.
But a lot of people then, when they really come into themselves and find their voice, as you had said before, is when they recapture whatever that spirit is from when they were younger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the larger question that I've been thinking of for the past, 20, 30 minutes. For you, any artist could ignore whatever the feeling is inside, could ignore the vulnerability and be like, well, I do want to make music, and I know that X or Y music, whatever, Ariana Grande, Slater, something, right, is popular. Why not do that? I know this is kind of a counterfactual, but like, why not do that versus make something that comes from you, comes from vulnerability, comes from your own integrity? Why not do the other thing?
I just think that for me, the cost of that is just too high. I think that it would have a sort of corroding kind of effect on me as a person to operate that way, to operate from a place of total sort of cynicism, and that if doing it your way leads to no critical or, I don't know, any type of success that can be measured, I think that is less of a cost than doing it from a place of cynicism and then getting all the things you want and then realizing that you have betrayed yourself along the way. And everyone has, I don't know, I think that it's that David Whyte thing again of like everyone having something quite singular that they can offer to the world. And maybe that thing is meant to reach 1 million people. Maybe that thing's meant to reach, 10 people, but really reach them and move them. And, obviously what I want is for my thing to reach enough people that I can have a successful career, but that's a risk I'm willing to take because the other option of figuring out how to do it from a cynical place that might lead to more success is just it wouldn't be a good way for me to live. I'd take on a lot of damage. I think, operating that way.
Yeah, yeah. Is this in any way? This is what I wanted to go back to when I said I had some biographical questions. Is this in any way connected with maybe your moral upbringing, with growing up? You said, I don't know if I read this online. You said Catholic, but I remember reading something online where you used the word devout. So, is
Yeah,
there any connections to me? The if someone says devout, that doesn't just mean like, yes, we incense. I really don't know. I'm Jewish, so I don't know a ton about.
sure.
I've been to a Catholic church a handful of times for funerals and
Yeah.
first communions.
Yes, that's the
So
thing.
I know there's a lot of pageantry, but there's also here in America very much there was a deep connection between anti-war and Catholicism in the 70s and 80s, the anti-war movement, and there were a lot of Christian leftists, and it's I think it's coming back, especially the Pope being
Yeah.
very like outspoken about a lot of left leaning things. And I'm wondering if there are connections between your moral upbringing and your artistic outlook.
I think to some extent, I think that's probably really true. Me and my parents have vastly different beliefs. And I'm not Catholic. Uh, and they remain, very devout, practicing Catholics, but we have really different beliefs about the world. And, you know, I do think that they encouraged a kind of, I don't know, a kind of you use the word thoughtful, and I guess it is that. I think they encouraged a kind of thoughtfulness about what you decide to do with your life and you know, your contribution to the world, I suppose. I think that's quite a religious thing of like your place in things. And so maybe there's an element of that in it. And the more, yeah, there's lots of maybe crossover there with that. And I think, seeing my dad's example of he never pursued it as a career, but that didn't make it any less important in his life. And it certainly didn't make him any less good at it. Like he's a very, very gifted artist. He just doesn't have, a public record to prove it. So yeah, I think it's partly a moral thing and partly beyond my parents' religious beliefs, just some of how they were about art is in there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then last question, because this just came to me as you were saying that. For you, why make it public? Right? You have this example of someone who's a great artist in your life who is just like, yeah, it's part of my you know, daily practice, but it's not something I feel compelled to put into the world. Why
Mm,
for you do you feel compelled?
that's really interesting. And I actually ask myself that quite a lot. And I ask it in my therapy as well. I'm like, I'm like, why am I choosing? I could just be like my dad and have a different career and do this for pleasure like my dad did. I don't know. I think for me, I can't imagine doing anything else as a career. I also think of the arts as vocations. And I think my dad had a couple of vocations. His vocation as a teacher, as a parent, and his vocation as an artist was woven into all of that. But I have felt quite strongly a vocational pull towards art. And I think that part of it for me as a vocation is in the completion of the circle of it not just being for me, but for being others, for being for others. And I hope that the more I work as an artist, the more I can orient towards that thing of like, how can I be more generous in my work and how can I make it, how can I continue in that vein of it being for sharing
Yeah.
and not just for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that vocation idea because, like, I've tried other things. I've done plenty of other things.
Yeah.
I've
Me
worked in
too.
I was a professor. I've done a lot of other stuff. It didn't
Yeah.
take. It didn't fit.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah. I don't I don't have a plan B. It's kind of that. So yeah, but I think the broader philosophical question is quite interesting and something I think about a lot and don't have a really clear answer for. But I am compelled to share it And there's a really good Louise Gluck essay. She wrote some great essays on like being an artist, and one of them was called A Poet's Education. And she speaks a little bit to this in that essay. And she speaks about, it's great for this podcast, actually. It's being about beginnings, but she writes about her education as a poet. And she's not just talking about a literal education, she's talking about like her upbringing. She talks about her dad, who was an artist, but he never shared anything. And, she talks about the difference between actually him not sharing anything and her pursuing poetry as a career. And I think she probably does a better job of answering it than I can. So if you're listening and you want to, dig into that, Louise Gluck has some great thoughts on it.
Ellie, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an absolute delight.
Oh, Andy, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for your really considerate questions. It's been really nice to speak to you.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, 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 bye.